I believe it was like in September 1988. It was kind of a nice, hot, sunny day, like the end of summer. And Chris and Kurt and Tad and Tracy came up in their old white van from Tacoma. Chris and his girlfriend Shelly lived in Tacoma then, and Tracy and Kurt lived in Olympia. And so they drove up to Seattle, and I lived in an artist co-op, and they came there to visit me, and then they picked me up, and we drove back to Tacoma to shoot pictures next to the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And this photo is like one of the ones of Kurt next to the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And I think he filmed 3 from that photo session. The orange one, which is color infrared and has a more fisheye lens, and then the polarized one are also from that day. And I don't know, Kurt, he was really young and sweet and didn't really do drugs. I think we smoked a little bit of pot and maybe drank a beer or something like that. It wasn't like anything serious. And had a real good time. And I think it took us all day, really. Like, we spent a lot of time. That was the first band I ever photographed, and it was the first time they had been professionally photographed by a photographer. And I think Sub Pop paid me all of $25. And both of the pictures are on the front and the back of the Love Buzz CD. I don't know, I guess what I think is conveyed in those pictures is Kurt is so nice and young and innocent, and he didn't really do drugs then, and no, I mean, I don't know. It was just fun. We were all having fun. We didn't think much of it at the time. So in January '89, Nirvana had a gig at the Hub Ballroom, which was at the University of Washington. And so they were getting ready to put out their first album. And so they had me come out and shoot some pictures live at that show. And then they met me, I think it was the next day or a few days later, maybe the week after, at my studio in Belltown, and then we went for a walk around Belltown and shot a bunch of pictures that were supposed to be for their album cover. As it turned out, Kurt had really bad acne the day we shot the pictures, and since none of us really knew what we were doing yet, we didn't really know how to cover it up, and so he ended up really hating the pictures, so they ended up running one of Tracy's live photos on the Bleach cover, but I ended up with a few rolls of film of them at that time. And so then, like, they went on tour a few times, and then in 1990 they had a huge show at here, I'm going to show you those pictures, at the Motorsports Garage, which was over by the freeway, and the Dwarves were opening for them. I think there might have been like 4 or 5 bands on the bill that night, and all of a sudden they were huge, you know, and this was before Nevermind came out. But I guess Bleach had gotten pretty popular, especially locally. And compared to like the shows like a year before where there was, like I say, maybe 20 people or less at the show, like this time the hall was big and it was completely packed. And there were kids stage diving and it was like wild. And then Dylan, Kurt's like really close friend, came and got me in the audience and gave me his backstage pass, because that was the first time you actually needed a pass to get backstage. Before, you could just walk back there like it wasn't a big deal. And so he came and got me, and he gave me his pass, and he said, "Go up on the stage and stay right here. You want to get some photos of this." And then when Kurt came out, he said, "Save some pictures for the end. I'm going to do something fun." And as it turned out, he smashed his guitar. That was like the first time he smashed his guitar and stuff. It wasn't actually his real guitar. Like, he had like a real one that he was playing, and then on the last couple songs he switched to like this other guitar. But eventually, like, he kept on smashing it and gluing it back together for every show and stuff. And it was pretty fun. And I don't know, I like that show because it was wild. There were so many kids there. And, also there was like a bunch of other photographers. Like, there was a couple of the English guys. I think they just, they named it Grunge, and they had announced that it was cool. And so there was all these like English people coming over, because it was getting really popular in England before it got popular in the United States. And so, I don't know, I guess that was really fun. I mean, it was a fun night. Well, I think the big story that I've heard, and Kathleen actually told me this story, so I know it's true, I've also read it, is that Kurt and Tracy had this apartment down on Pear Street in Olympia, and Tracy worked, and Kurt didn't really work, or he'd work for like 2 weeks and then quit or something. And so anyways, it was his job to sort of stay home and take care of things since Tracy was working. And Kurt hung out with a lot of women. I mean, a lot of really smart, intense women. And they were hanging out, and their whole room was covered in graffiti and stuff. Like, they were sticking things up on the wall and writing things on the wall. And Kathleen wrote "Kurt Smells Like Teen Spirit" on the wall, and then I guess that sort of evolved into that song. Well, apparently Teen Spirit is a kind of deodorant. But Kurt didn't know that, and so he went from there. I think like a lot of their philosophy and a lot of the interviews that I see of him where he's talking about politics and stuff are very influenced by that group of people and the whole sort of thought process that was going on in those days. I love Nirvana, their music, and I'd been into punk rock for about 10 years before that, or 12 years before that, and so we all called ourselves punk rockers in those days, and Nirvana considered themselves a punk band. They only got labeled grunge like later on, a couple of years later after that, and we all basically always considered ourselves punk. Of course, I loved the mix of pop and the harsh reality or whatever music. Like I think it was right after Nevermind came out, and I was asking him about some of the lyrics because a lot of times, like unless you have a really good stereo, you can't understand all the words on there. And my stereo wasn't so great, so I missed about half the words on there. They're kind of garbled, and sometimes I'd think he'd be saying one thing and it would really be something else. So I never found out till I looked at them years later. And I think some of the songs I knew were about friends of mine. Like I know that About a Girl on the first record is about Tracy. And I know that, I can't think of the name of it, is about Dylan, about the boy who shoots his gun and he don't know what it means. And, so I mean, there's like some things that just kind of ring true, but I mean, we were all kind of part of this artist, poet scene in Seattle and Olympia, and we all hung out with a lot of people that were doing like art and consider themselves artists. And so I just thought, it was part of the same thing. I mean, Nirvana didn't stand out from the rest of people. I thought everyone was very talented and very interesting in the whole scene, and there was a lot of really smart people. And that's what was really cool about it is we might have had no money, but we were all sitting around talking about the meaning of life and, different conceptual ideas about things and stuff. And Nirvana is actually quite political in a lot of their song lyrics. Both Chris and Kurt have been involved in local politics here in Washington State, and I think now, 10 years later, Chris is actually still involved in local politics. He was considering a run for the lieutenant governor. That didn't actually happen this year, but maybe in 4 more years he'll do it. Kurt was a very intense person. I've had like a few friends that sort of had personalities like that. He was extremely driven. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he had like big plans on how to get there. And I think that a lot of people in our crowd were that way. Basically, we all thought we were going to take over the world and change the world, And actually, I was kind of surprised when it actually happened. But I mean, maybe not so surprised because that was definitely our plan, was to influence things and change things, both between like Riot Girl and sort of the whole Nirvana thing. Sort of like the people that had been kicked around in high school, like finally got a voice and became popular. And I think that maybe that was one of the things that drew us together in that whole group, is sort of having been kicked around, because in the United States, in high school, they usually pick on anybody that's skinny and doesn't play football. And so Kurt had been one of those people, and I had been, and a lot of other people had been, that were in that group too, so. Well, I think what happened was a lot of the people from the record label are from LA, and they have a really completely different attitude than the people do in Seattle. People are more straightforward here, and in LA they tell you what they think you want to hear, and then they manipulate you into doing what they want, but they never come right out and ask you. And so I think that for us from the Northwest, it was really hard to figure that out because it seemed almost the opposite of the way we were used to doing things here. And I think it made everyone uncomfortable because like they were the kind of people that we never even had to talk to, and then Kurt, to have all those people surrounding him, and then the thing is he had handlers, and they wouldn't let his old friends get backstage. Like he had to be really cagey to run into him, or like he'd run into Courtney all the time, but then like he wouldn't go out that much because she was more social, and I think especially when he started getting into drugs and stuff, like he wouldn't go out hardly at all. And they had moved to Seattle at that point, and so like we had other mutual friends that I was like in touch with, but I never really ran into him like around town or anything. I was at home, and it was pouring down rain that day. It had been raining for a long time. Everybody was kind of blue.